Ja, vielen Dank. Ralf, liebe Marie-Louise, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. To quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." This is how Martin Luther King put it. Ladies and gentlemen, also my Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock quoted Martin Luther King during her speech when she opened an event on cooperation for accountability in Ukraine during the United Nations General Assembly High-Level Week this September. Minister Kuleba, you will remember this event in the German House in New York. You were the keynote speaker. You hosted it together with Ukraine and other partners in order to strengthen the international cooperation for accountability. This is incredibly strong already today. Dozens of other foreign ministers joined us. The event gave us an opportunity to follow up on the Ukraine Accountability Conference that the government of the Netherlands hosted together with the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and the European Commission in The Hague in July, where I had the honor to speak for Germany. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm grateful to Marie-Louise Beck and Ralf Fuchs for bringing together such a distinguished group of people, all dedicated to discussing justice in face of Russia's war against Ukraine, which Russia started in eastern Ukraine in 2014, and which in February of this year, it turned into a full-scale war of aggression against the rest of the country. We are horrified by the recent and ongoing Russian attacks on civilian targets and critical infrastructure in Kiev and many other Ukrainian cities, which kill numerous civilians. We strongly condemn these attacks, which are yet another example of Russian disregard for international humanitarian law. Those responsible need to be held accountable. We see these heinous attacks supported by Iranian drones as a result of Russia's inability to advance militarily on the front. The Ukrainian army impresses all analysts with their tactical smartness and their enduring will to fight. We admire the extraordinary courage of our Ukrainian friends who are fighting for their country, for our shared values, and for our European peaceful order. I am touched by the news of Wednesday that the European Parliament has awarded the Ukrainian people and their representatives with this year's Sakharov Prize, and I send you my congratulations. I repeat today what I already said numerous times. Ukraine must win this war, and I'm convinced Ukraine will win this war. This war will not end somehow. It will end, be won by the Ukrainian people, and no one else but Ukraine will decide how and when this war is over. Or to put it in short, this war will end at conditions that are written in Kiev and not in Moscow. And it's the sovereign decision of the Ukrainian people and their government to decide which conditions these are. The German government will continue to support our Ukrainian friends politically, financially, with humanitarian aid, and militarily, as long as it is needed. Völkerrecht gegen Völkermord, international law against genocide. This is the title Marie-Louise and Ralf chose for this conference. In the face of mass killings and horrified crimes, we often see a political urge to qualify atrocities as a genocide, which is understandable. We will have to discuss, and ultimately courts will have to decide whether the crimes committed in Ukraine by Russia qualify indeed as genocide, or whether they should be seen as crimes against humanity. To find out where exactly we stand in this discussion, in the case of the crimes currently being committed in Ukraine, it is the very purpose of this conference. For me, this conference is an opportunity to reflect on how Germany supports international efforts to bring perpetrators of core international crimes which are being committed in Ukraine today to justice. It is also an opportunity to look back at how we dealt with the crimes in the past. The most notorious example of all being, of course, the Nazi leadership's attempt to murder all European Jews, which we now refer as the Shoah or the Holocaust. Mr. Schwarzmann, you survived the Shoah. I'm deeply honored that you joined us today from Odessa. I thank you for your testimony. As a German citizen and as German Minister of State at the Federal Foreign Office, I wish to say that the establishment of the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg by the Allied powers was a gift to our country and to humankind. The tribunal tried 22 major Nazi German diplomatic, economic, political, and military leaders for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, and for conspiracy to commit each of these crimes. Both the legal concept of crimes against humanity as well as the concept of genocide were relatively new back then. Crimes against humanity and genocide are two distinct concepts that have two different objectives. One aims at the individual, the other one aims at a specific group. What they have in common? Mass killings. For our specific discussion today, the origins of these two concepts are rather fascinating. They can be tracked back to two men who studied law in the Ukrainian city of Lviv between 1915 and 1925. Hersch Lauterbach, who became a professor of international law at Cambridge University, and Raphael Lemkin, who invented the word genocide in 1943, meaning the killing of specific groups. Now back to the Nuremberg trials. At the time, there was a big debate amongst the Allies about whether to deal with the atrocities committed as crimes against humanity or as a genocide. In fact, and we know that from history, they decided against genocide, and Herr Lauterbach was the man responsible for putting crimes against humanity into the Nuremberg Charter. From today's perspective, it is both surprising and irritating that in Nuremberg, the Shoah was not judged to have been a genocide. It fulfilled all the criteria. But in fact, not the Shoah was at the center of the Nuremberg trials, but the war crimes. The outlawing of the war to find a new world justice was the aim of the responsible prosecutors at that time. They later admitted that they only fully grasped the magnitude of the Shoah and the existence of concentration camps during the course of the trials when they were shown the respective pictures and films. The tribunal formally opened in November 1945, 6.5 months after Germany surrendered. It was the first time that an international tribunal was used as a post-war mechanism for bringing national leaders to justice. In all, 199 defendants were tried at Nuremberg. The moral, legal, and historical implications of Nuremberg's legacy must never be forgotten. We must also bear in mind the shortcomings that I already mentioned. Ladies and gentlemen, the history of mass atrocities, unfortunately, did not end with the Second World War. In fact, in spite of the aspirations of the UN Charter to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, we have been faced with violent breaches of the UN Charter, which have often come hand in hand with the return of mass atrocities. The wars in former Yugoslavia in the 90s, as case in a point were marked by massive war crimes and crimes against humanity. Judge Goldstone, it is also an honor to have you with us today. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia was another gift to humankind for its own moral, legal, and historic legacy. It was established in 1993 by the Security Council of the United Nations in response to the atrocities that occurred in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It was the first international criminal tribunal since Nuremberg and the first ever mandated to prosecute the crime of genocide amongst other offenses. It charged 161 people. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm thankful that in 1998, a vast majority of the international community established the International Criminal Court through a United Nations treaty. It was the first permanent judicial body set up to try individuals up to the highest levels of government for the gravest crimes of concern to the international community: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. I am proud that Germany is one of the 123 countries that are state parties to the Rome Statute of the ICC. Germany is a staunch supporter of the ICC and in particular of its investigation into the events in Ukraine. Germany was among the 43 countries that referred the situation in Ukraine to the office of the ICC prosecutor. This allowed expediting matters. It allowed the ICC prosecutor to, and I quote, immediately proceed with active investigations and quote, into quote, any past and present allegations of war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide committed on any part of the territory of Ukraine by any person, unquote, after November 21st, 2013, without the need to seek authorization from the ICC's pretrial chamber. Germany is the second largest donor to the ICC and supports the court with almost 18 million euro per year. As the ICC's work significantly increased with the opening of investigations into the events in Ukraine, we provided an extra €1 million, and we currently second 8 experts. Ladies and gentlemen, Germany is also applying the principle of universal jurisdiction in order to impose accountability through our domestic legal process. Germany's Federal Public Prosecutor General has opened structural investigations into war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine based on our Code of Crimes Against International Law that was enacted in 2002. His office is bringing in its leading expertise from trials of war crimes committed by the Syrian regime or Daesh. Germany stands already to extend its support to the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group to further strengthen capabilities for investigating and prosecuting international crimes committed in Ukraine. We already have one German prosecutor working with this group and have offered further German prosecutors with expertise in investigating sexual violence. I'm glad we have Wayne Jordash as speaker and look forward to hearing his insights into the work of on the ground in Ukraine. Germany also backs Ukraine in its case against Russia at the International Court of Justice concerning allegations of genocide under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. We have intervened in this case because we are convinced that Russia is abusing the Genocide Convention as a pretext for its war of aggression. It is in the interest of all state parties to the Genocide Convention and more broadly of the international community as a whole that no state misuses or abuses the convention. The convention embodies the solemn pledge to prevent the crime of genocide and hold those responsible to account. As the convention confirms the most elementary principles of morality, it is important that the state parties to this convention share the court their interpretation of some essential provisions. What's crucial about the ICC in the ICJ proceedings is that they target both state responsibility and individual responsibility for violations of international law, right up to the highest levels of Russia's government. The ICC and the ICJ are the main pillars where the international community can use international law against violations of international law by Russia and by Russians with utmost legitimacy. Before I conclude, I wish to file 3 questions for today's debate, if I may. And maybe I should have mentioned at the beginning, I'm an economist, not a lawyer. Firstly, we are faced with a horrendous situation in Mariupol during the siege there. From all we know, Ukrainians were killed in large numbers. The provision of electricity, heating, food, medicine were stopped. What is our preliminary verdict with regard to the crimes committed in Mariupol? Secondly, we have seen quite a number of reports, pictures, and videos of significant numbers of Ukrainian children being deported to Russia, being made available for adoption by Russian families. What's our preliminary verdict with regard to this crime? And thirdly, the Russian president has repeatedly denied in both writing and speaking that such a thing as Ukraine or a Ukrainian people do exist. How do you legally assess this rather ridiculous statement of his? Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes my questions and my speech. Thank you for your attention, your understanding that Parliament is in session and has named ballots today. And now I'm happy that a few minutes are left and to take some of your questions right away. I thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Tobias. Ich will jetzt keine Zeit verschwenden. Wir haben noch vielleicht 10, 12 Minuten für ein paar kurze Fragen oder Kommentare. Wer möchte gerne das Wort ergreifen? Please.
Thank you.
Could you introduce yourself
yes.
briefly?
My name's Tonya Stevens. I worked on Magnitsky sanctions, specifically in the Australian Parliament. We passed the legislation last December. My question is, I'll start with a statement. A couple of days ago, the Canadian government made an announcement that they would personally sanction Putin enablers, judges, magistrates, law enforcers, in particular those responsible for the imprisonment of Vladimir Kara-Murza, who won this year's Václav Havel Prize. Alexei Navalny has listed 6,000 enablers, including members of the Duma, that should be sanctioned because they are enabling this bloodshed in the Ukraine. Is there any such desire, any such will in this building 200 meters from here called the Bundestag to follow suit and sanction individuals very, very heavily that enable Putin and his regime?
Thanks a lot. Tobias.
So first of all, your question was chosen very carefully because you asked for the desire in the building 200 meters ago. And I think I can confirm that in many parliamentary groups, in many parties, there is a desire to look if our sanctions are targeted, if they are enough, if we list the right people. There is a debate going on about the whole issue of visas for the Schengen countries, how to deal with those issues. And at the same time, I have to stress the point, we do not have the same legal framework as Canada. So if you want to do a listing of people which is really successful and which you can really enforce, you have to do it on a European level. But I can assure you, inside the European Union, we are discussing all the sanctions already imposed. Okay, are there loopholes? Are there problems with compliance? Do we have the right people on the list? And so on the one hand, we have to wait and see. On the other hand, I wouldn't be surprised if the list of people sanctioned enlarges.
Oh, no, please, no dialogues. Julia Osmolowska.
Thank you very much. I'm Yulia Smolska from Ukraine, and thank you very much for your presentation and German position with regard to international law and justice. And I need to refer to the G7 communique when you said that the great leaders support President Zelensky's vision of just peace. And you mentioned twice the accountability issue. My question would be to you, there is a lot of discussions that a special tribunal on crime of aggression should be established because it enables actually to charge political leaders of Russia on that. And you mentioned that ICC, according to your vision, can do this, also charging a natural person. So can you just reflect, please, on Ukraine's proposal on special tribunal? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, because it refers to the elephant in the room, to be honest.
Of course.
The special tribunal.
It's the tough one.
And the answer might not be satisfying, because I have to tell you, these are ongoing discussions, but we very well understand the urge and the reasons why people are urging for a special tribunal. So I can tell you our arguments pro and con and how we are dealing with that issue. So on the one hand, when we say we want to strengthen and to protect the international rules-based order, the first thing you always look at is, can this be done by the ICC? Can it be done by existing structures? Can there be maybe a special chamber of the ICC dealing with war crimes committed in Ukraine, for instance? So I always would be reluctant to establish new bodies if there are existing bodies, and would at first ask the question, okay, can existing bodies and existing structures deal with the issue? But I can assure you, if the answer is no, or if the answer would be, it would make more sense to have something, and I would make the caveat, I would make the condition that it should be inside the framework of the United Nations. It needs to be supported by the United Nations, for sure. I can understand the argument very well, and I can tell you it's an ongoing discussion. We are in close consultation with our Ukrainian friends, with the Ukrainian government. There are discussions in New York going on, and so it's an open question for us at the moment. But the reasons why Ukrainians are asking for such a tribunal, they are well understood.
Thank you very much. I think we are all quite clear, quite aware that especially these two topics, establishing a special tribunal on war and aggression and addressing the responsibility to prevent genocide. This is a lot of political dynamite. It is first about which kind of obligations would come from that for the EU, the German government, the West, responsibility to act, and secondly, putting the Russian leadership at a tribunal because of the crime of war of aggression. This would definitely close the door for any kind of return to any kind of diplomatic cooperation with the current Russian regime. So does that play any role in your considerations, these political implications?
Alf, you know, we are talking about the possibility. I have to say about the possibility, because in the end, courts will make a verdict and will decide. But we are talking of very serious crimes against humanity, maybe genocide. And in the end, it's a legal issue. I believe in the current moment, the most important thing is to collect evidence. The first condition for accountability is to collect evidence, to have a documentation of what happened, where it happened, to collect all the pieces. In the middle of the 90s, no one could have imagined, or only a few, maybe you and Marie-Louise, maybe only a few could have imagined that one day Mr. Milosevic, Mr. Karadzic, Mr. Mladic, that they face a court and are being held responsible for what happened in the Western Balkans in the 90s. And we do not know yet what will happen in 5 or in 10 years if people who are responsible for what's happening today in Ukraine will be held accountable in front of a court. But as a precondition that this is possible, you need to collect evidence. And so this is the reason why the German government makes an emphasis on seconding staff, on providing forensic material, on bringing the case to the prosecutor of the ICC. And I believe in 5 years or something, the issue of political implications might be a smaller issue, to be blunt, than it seems today.
Okay, 2 final questions. First from John Conblum and then from Marie-Louise. Sorry, we cannot prolong the session.
Thank you very much. You may remember that I was the American Special Coordinator for the Balkans and played a very active role in establishing the Yugoslav Tribunal. It wasn't going so well until we made it political. Mr. Lindner, you seem to be foreclosing all political avenues here. You said in the mid-90s, nobody could imagine that Milosevic would be a trial. Well, that was our goal. But it took about 5 or 6 years to get the government of Yugoslavia to give him up, so to speak. So I think the question here is not so much what the legalities are, it's whether there is the political will in the United States and in Europe to do this. And right now, I don't see that political will. Certainly not in Washington, it's not there, and probably not in Berlin. But the fact is that simply to have the legalities is not going to work. It has to be a political process. It has to be outside of the criminal court, which the United States is not a signatory of, by the way. I talked with Professor Kress after his great presentation. He said it can be done without the Security Council in the United Nations. So I think we need a political momentum now and not a legal analysis. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And Marie-Louise, clear statement.
Okay, thank you. Dear Tobias, since we have been colleagues for so many years, I'm allowed to squeeze you a little bit. And I want to take up what John Conblum just said. The prevention the Genocide Convention is explicitly called Convention for the Prevention of Genocide. If your argument or the government's argument would be correct, we now first have collect evidence. How will we, I don't say you, how will we prevent a genocide or crimes against humanity? Number one. So I think John Conblum is totally right when he says it is a political question if we want to act in time. If within 10 years, Mr. Putin will be in front of a court, yes, this is also going to be very, very important. But now it's about political decisions.
Thanks a lot, Tobias.
Marie-Louise, I would still disagree, to be honest, because so I totally agree with the fact we have to prevent a genocide, we have to prevent war crimes for sure. You have to take into account that there is a war, an ongoing war on the territory of Ukraine. And to be very outspoken, the best prevention is to stop that war, not to stop it at any conditions, not to stop it at the condition that Ukraine surrenders, but to stop it in a way that Ukraine wins this war, meaning that we provide further aid to Ukraine, as I said, especially in military terms. That's my point. As far as I have seen, and as far as I have experienced also in The Hague at the accountability conference hosted by the government of the Netherlands, there is, on the international level, there is an awareness that accountability and to hold people accountable for who are responsible for what's happening today, it's a big issue. It's a big issue for sure. And I wouldn't be surprised if the political momentum grows, but I would say the top priority at the moment to prevent war crimes in Ukraine is supporting the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian army. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Tobias. Unfortunately, we must let you go. And maybe you take with going out, take with the question, you must not answer it here, that it was already mentioned that part of the accountability of the Russian leadership for this war of destruction is also financial compensations and reparations. And this should be also part of our political endgame for this war, using the Russian assets in Europe for financial compensations for Ukraine. Thank you.